Clara had always been the quiet type, the kind of person who blended into the background. She wasn't loud, she didn't demand attention, and yet, when her fingers touched the keys of a piano, the world seemed to pause. Music had been a part of her life since she could remember, filling spaces with its beauty. But there were days like today when Clara wondered if it was enough. She had been practicing for weeks, preparing for the gala performance that was just days away. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. People in the music world talked about it, whispered about it, really. The gala concert at the Royal Hall was a big deal. Anyone who performed there could expect their career to shift, to rise in stature. The critics, the influential figures, would be watching closely. If you impressed them, doors opened. But if you faltered, it could be the end of the road. Clara didn't see herself as someone who could make that kind of impact. She never had. Her life had been a steady climb of small victories and quiet moments of triumph. Every performance was a test, every note an opportunity to be noticed, but she never felt as if she truly stood out. She wasn't like the others, those who had natural charisma, whose performances could fill a room with energy just by their presence. She was just Clara, a pianist who lived for the music but wasn't sure the world was listening. The nerves started the moment she received the invitation, a thin envelope almost too thin for what it promised. When she read the letter, her stomach twisted. "You are invited to perform at the prestigious gala concert. Your performance will be the highlight of the evening. For most musicians, it would be a dream come true." For Clara, it felt like an impossible task. She had never performed at such an important event. Sure, she had played at small recitals in front of friends and family, even at local venues. But this was a different world. A world where even the smallest mistake could be magnified, dissected, and ridiculed. But the real source of her anxiety wasn't the stage or the crowd. It was the person who would be attending, Victor Faro. He was one of the most well-known critics in the classical music world. His reviews could make or break a performer. If you earned a compliment from him, it could propel you into the spotlight. But if he didn't like you, your career might never recover. Victor Faro wasn't just a critic. He was a name that sent chills down the spines of musicians everywhere. He had a reputation for being brutally honest, for not holding back. There were stories of performers who had left his reviews in tears, crushed by the sharpness of his words. Some said he was more interested in tearing down musicians than appreciating their talent. Clara had never met him, but she had heard the stories. Everyone had. Her teacher had warned her about him countless times, reminding her to be prepared for the worst. "You never know with Faro," he would say. "He may not be impressed with anything, no matter how good you are. Just stay focused on your music. Don't let him get inside your head." But it wasn't just Faro who made Clara anxious. It was the competition. There would be other pianists there, some more experienced, some more well-known. And then there was Alana. Alana was everything Clara wasn't. She was confident, beautiful, and a virtuoso on the piano. Every time Clara heard her play, it was like watching a storm come to life. Alana's fingers flew across the keys, never missing a note. Her performance a whirlwind of emotion and technique. She had everything, the talent, the presence, the confidence. And most of all, she had the respect of everyone in the industry. Clara had seen Alana perform before. It was like watching a force of nature. Every movement, every gesture seemed to command the stage. The audience loved her, and critics adored her. She was the kind of pianist everyone expected to succeed, the kind who could walk into any room and have all eyes on her without ever trying, and Alana made sure everyone knew it. She didn't speak to Clara much, but when she did, it was in a way that made it clear she saw Clara as no real competition. "Don't worry, Clara," she had said once, her voice dripping with a mixture of condescension and casualness. "I'm sure you'll do fine. Just don't try to overdo it, okay?" Clara had smiled, but inside her stomach had twisted. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the way Alana said them. The way she spoke as if Clara were beneath her. As if Clara's success didn't matter, because it was always going to be Alana who took center stage. Now, as the days passed and the performance date loomed closer, Clara could feel her nerves building. She practiced for hours every day, pouring everything she had into her music, but it didn't feel like enough. No matter how many times she played a piece, no matter how perfectly she nailed a passage, it never felt right. It wasn't until she had finished practicing one evening, sitting alone in the empty music hall, that Clara realized why. It wasn't about the music. It wasn't even about the performance. It was about the fear of failure. She feared that despite everything she had done to get here, she wouldn't be good enough. She feared that the audience, the critics, and most of all Alana, would look at her and see someone who didn't belong. She feared that no matter how many hours she spent practicing, no matter how hard she tried, it would never be enough to earn their approval. The weight of it all threatened to crush her. But as Clara sat there alone in the dark hall, something shifted inside her. She wasn't going to prove herself to Alana. She wasn't going to prove herself to Victor Farrow or to anyone else. She was going to prove something to herself. She had spent so much time trying to meet other people's expectations, trying to live up to a standard set by someone else, that she had forgotten why she played the piano in the first place. Music wasn't about impressing anyone. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about feeling. It was about expression. It was about telling a story without words through the keys of the piano. Clara stood up, her feet suddenly feeling lighter. She took a deep breath and walked back to the piano. She wasn't going to let fear control her. She wasn't going to let anyone's judgment define who she was. If she was going to perform, she was going to do it for herself, for the love of the music, not the applause. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys. The silence in the room seemed to hold its breath. And then, with a steady hand, Clara began to play. The days leading up to the performance were some of the longest of Clara's life. Each morning she woke up with the same gnawing feeling in her stomach, like there was something she had forgotten to do, something she had to prepare for, even though she'd practiced every day. She could hear the ticking of the clock in the corner of her room, as if it were counting down the seconds to something monumental. Every time she stepped into the practice hall, she could feel the weight of it. The big performance. The critics. Alana. She tried to block them out, but they were there, lurking at the back of her mind. Alana, the one person Clara knew, would be her biggest challenge. The very thought of her made Clara's heart race, a mixture of admiration and anxiety. Alana was everything Clara wasn't. Confident, effortlessly stylish, a virtuoso who could play anything with what seemed like no effort at all. Every time Alana performed, she made it look easy. It was hard not to feel a little jealous, but Clara didn't want to admit that to herself. She'd heard stories about Alana's rise to fame. She'd been playing the piano since she was young, just like Clara, but there was something different about her. While Clara had been practicing in silence, Alana had been winning awards, performing at sold-out venues, and gaining a reputation as one of the best. She had an aura, a magnetic quality that drew people in, and Clara couldn't help but wonder if that same aura would be enough to overshadow her when the two of them shared the stage. It wasn't just that Alana was talented. It was how she carried herself. She walked into a room like she owned it, her head held high, her smile so bright that it almost felt like a challenge. Clara couldn't remember a time when Alana had ever been nervous. There was no trace of self-doubt, no hint of hesitation. Every performance was a perfect show, polished and flawless. Clara, on the other hand, wasn't so sure. She had always been the quiet one, the one who preferred to blend in, to stay out of the spotlight. She wasn't the type of person to demand attention. But when she walked into a room, she wanted to be seen. She wanted her music to speak for her, but sometimes she doubted whether anyone was really listening. A few days before the gala, Clara ran into Alana at the rehearsal hall. Clara was practicing a difficult section of a piece she had been struggling with, trying to get the phrasing just right. She was so focused that she didn't notice Alana until she was standing right in front of her, looking down at the sheet music. "Need help with that?" Alana's voice was sweet but carried an edge that made Clara stiffen. Clara looked up, forcing a smile. "I think I've got it," she replied, though the self-doubt in her voice betrayed her. Alana's lips curved into a small smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, if you ever need a hand, you know where to find me," she said. But it wasn't an offer. It was more of a reminder that she, Alana, was the one who had it all figured out. Clara couldn't help but feel the weight of her words. Alana wasn't being rude exactly, but there was an unspoken understanding that she was the one everyone expected to succeed. It wasn't just her talent, it was the way she carried herself. Alana exuded confidence, and in the world of classical music that made a huge difference. Clara tried to shake off the unease Alana's words left behind, but it stuck with her long after the rehearsal. As she practiced alone in the quiet of the hall, she couldn't help but wonder, what if she's right? What if I'm not good enough? She had always doubted herself. There were times when she felt like she was invisible, like she was just another face in the crowd. She wasn't flashy. She didn't have the same natural stage presence as Alana, and she didn't know how to project that kind of power. But she was determined not to let those doubts control her. She had worked too hard for too long to let anyone tell her she didn't belong. That night, as she lay in bed, Clara replayed the words from her teacher over and over in her mind. Focus on your music. Don't compare yourself to anyone else. It was easier said than done, but Clara knew it was true. She wasn't Alana, and she wasn't trying to be. She was Clara, and all she could do was give it everything she had. The next day, Clara arrived at the venue early. She liked to get there before the others, to have the place to herself for a little while. The sound of the piano keys in the empty hall always brought a sense of peace, like she could finally breathe without anyone watching. She walked onto the stage, the empty seats in the audience staring back at her, and took her place at the piano. The wood felt smooth under her hands as she ran her fingers across the keys. She closed her eyes and played a few simple scales, trying to relax, to calm her racing thoughts. But no matter how many times she played through the scales or how many hours she spent rehearsing, there was still that voice in the back of her mind, the one that whispered, "What if you fail?" The sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, and Clara opened her eyes to see Alana walking toward the piano, a few of her friends in tow. Alana smiled when she saw Clara sitting at the piano, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the smile of someone who was always in control, always one step ahead. "You're here early," Alana said, her voice casual but with an edge. "I thought you'd want to get a little rest before tonight." She gave Clara a quick, appraising look. "You should probably take it easy. Wouldn't want to wear yourself out." Clara forced herself to smile. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice felt small compared to Alana's. "I just wanted to get a feel for the stage." Alana raised an eyebrow, as if she didn't quite believe her, but she didn't push. "Well, good luck tonight. You'll need it," she said, turning and walking off with her friends. Clara felt the sting of her words long after they were gone. It wasn't just that Alana didn't think she was good enough. It was the way she said it, like it was a given. Like she knew she was going to win, and Clara was just a placeholder in the audience. But Clara wasn't going to let Alana's words get to her. She wasn't going to let anyone tell her she didn't belong. She knew she had something to prove, not to Alana or anyone else, but to herself. She had been playing the piano for years, pouring her heart into every note. And if tonight was going to be her chance to show the world who she wasn't going to back down. As the day passed and the performance grew nearer, Clara did her best to ignore the nagging doubts that crept into her mind. She couldn't control what Alana or anyone else thought, but she could control the music. She could control how she played, and that was all that mattered. The evening finally arrived, and Clara stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the sound of the audience settling into their seats, the buzz of conversation filling the air. The nerves were almost unbearable, but Clara tried to push them away. This was her moment. She had worked for this, and no matter what happened, she was going to give it everything she had. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, the lights blinding for a moment before her eyes adjusted. The audience was watching, waiting. Clara's heart raced in her chest, but she focused on the piano. Her hands felt steady as she touched the keys. The music started, and for a moment, Clara forgot everything. The nerves, the doubt, even Alana. There was only the music. The audience seemed to disappear the moment Clara's fingers touched the piano keys. The world beyond the stage was no longer important. There was only the music, the soft, comforting hum of the piano as it filled the room. She wasn't thinking about the people in the crowd, or about Alana's dazzling performance earlier. It was just her and the music. For a few moments, she felt at peace. Her hands moved gracefully across the keys, each note flowing smoothly from one to the next. She had played this piece countless times, each rehearsal blending into the next. But tonight felt different. The sound seemed to vibrate through her chest, echoing in a way it never had before. There was something magical about this moment. Clara could feel it deep within her. Her heart beat a little faster as she lost herself in the music. It was as though the audience had become part of the piece, and every note she played spoke to them, even if they didn't fully understand it. She didn't care about being perfect. She didn't care about impressing anyone. She was simply pouring her heart into every chord. But then, as she reached the middle section of the piece, Clara heard something unexpected. It wasn't a mistake. She was still playing smoothly, her fingers moving with confidence. But it was a sensation, something deeper than the sound itself. It was the feeling of being watched, of all eyes being on her. She had performed on stage before, but this felt different. The eyes of the audience weren't just on her. They were waiting. The pressure was growing, pressing against her chest. Her nerves, which had been calm at first, started to resurface. She could feel her palms begin to sweat. The music, which had felt so natural moments ago, started to feel like a burden. Clara glanced out into the audience for a brief moment, searching for a familiar face. She spotted a few people she recognized, other musicians she had met at recitals and local performances. But they weren't the ones who caught her attention. It was the sea of strangers. The faces, the eyes, the looks that seemed to judge her every movement. The weight of their gaze felt heavier than it had ever felt before. And then she saw him, Victor Farrow, the critic who had haunted her thoughts for weeks. He was sitting near the front, his posture straight, his face unreadable. For a split second their eyes met and Clara's stomach twisted. She quickly looked down at her hands, focusing on the keys, trying to block him out. But it was no use. His presence loomed over her, an invisible force that made it hard to breathe. Clara's mind raced. She had heard so many stories about him, how he could tear apart an artist with a single sentence, how his reviews could make or break careers. He was the kind of critic who didn't hesitate to expose a flaw no matter how small. Every musician feared him, and now Clara was playing in front of him with the weight of his expectations hanging in the air. She shook her head, trying to banish the thoughts. But it wasn't easy. The pressure of performing, of being watched, was becoming too much. She felt the tremor in her hands, the slight hesitation in her fingers as she played a particularly tricky passage. She forced herself to keep going, but the mistake had already been made. A single note didn't sound quite right. It wasn't a major mistake, but it was enough to make Clara's heart skip a beat. The room felt colder all of a sudden. Clara's palms were slick against the ivory keys, and she could feel the sweat beading on her forehead. She wanted to stop, to start over, but it was too late. The music was already flowing, and she had to follow it to the end. She kept playing, but the music no longer felt like it belonged to her. It felt like something she was trying to catch up to. The notes no longer seemed to come naturally. They were forced, rushed. Each one felt like an attempt to salvage what had already been lost. As she neared the end of the piece, Clara could hear the applause in her mind, the moment when the music would finally stop and she could escape. But she hadn't finished yet, and it wasn't just the sound of the music that was in her ears, it was the pressure, the expectations, and the fear of failure that made it harder to play. Finally, she reached the last few notes, the final chords that would bring the piece to its conclusion. But instead of feeling triumphant, Clara felt empty. She played the last note, letting the sound ring through the hall, and for a moment everything went still. The audience was silent. Clara slowly lifted her hands from the keys, her heart racing. She couldn't read their expressions, but she didn't want to. She was afraid to know what they were thinking. The doubt in her mind was louder than the silence around her. She had tried so hard to lose herself in the music, to forget the eyes on her, but in the end, she couldn't escape it. She forced a smile as she stood up and bowed, trying to mask the disappointment she felt inside. The applause started softly, hesitant at first, and then grew louder, but Clara didn't hear it the way she wanted to. It didn't feel like the applause for a performance well done. It felt like a polite response, something that was given out of obligation rather than admiration. She left the stage, her heart still pounding in her chest. Her mind raced, going over every note, every movement, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't about the notes at all. It wasn't about the music. It was about her own fear, her own self-doubt. The moment she had stepped on that stage, she had already lost herself. Backstage, Clara found herself alone in the quiet, her breath still uneven. She could hear the chatter from the audience drifting through the walls, but it felt distant, disconnected from her. She had given everything she had in that performance, and yet it didn't feel like enough. As she sat down on the bench in the dressing room, she tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered. She had failed, not because of the mistake she had made on the piano, but because she hadn't truly believed in herself. She had let the pressure of the performance, The presence of the critics and the ghost of Alana's talent overshadow everything else. And then, to her surprise, she heard a knock on the door. Clara looked up, startled. It was one of the staff members holding a note in her hand. "Clara," the woman said gently, her face kind but serious, "there's someone here to see you." "A Mr. Farrow." Clara's heart dropped into her stomach. Victor Farrow? What could he possibly want? Is everything all right?" Clara asked, her voice shaky. The woman nodded. "He requested to speak with you after the performance. I'm not sure what it's about, but he seems impressed." Clara stood up, her legs weak beneath her. "Impressed?" she repeated, unsure of what to think. The staff member smiled softly. "You'll see for yourself. He's waiting in the lobby." Clara hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what to expect, but one thing was certain. Whatever happened, she needed to face it. She had given everything she had. Whether it was enough or not, she would find out soon enough. Taking a deep breath, Clara walked toward the door. She had no idea what Victor Farrow was about to say, but she was ready to hear it. Clara hesitated as she stepped into the hallway, her mind racing. She had expected a critique, a harsh judgment, something that would remind her of every flaw she had tried to hide. But she never imagined it would come to this. She had never been in a situation like this before, where someone, especially someone like Victor Farrow, would want to speak to her after a performance. The air in the hallway felt heavy, almost thick with the pressure of what she was about to face. Clara's footsteps echoed as she walked toward the lobby, the soft sound of her shoes against the floor amplifying the silence around her. Her stomach twisted with nerves, but there was something else there too, a strange mix of anticipation and fear. What could he possibly want to say? As she reached the lobby, she spotted him immediately. He was sitting near the front, tall and imposing, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. There was something almost intimidating about the way he sat, as if he were waiting for the right moment to speak. His eyes were focused on a piece of paper in front of him, but Clara knew he was aware of her approach. She could feel it. It was as if his presence alone was enough to command the room. For a moment, Clara stood frozen at the entrance, unsure of how to approach him. She had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was here, it felt different. Her mind raced, trying to prepare for the worst. What if he had hated her performance? What if he thought she wasn't ready, that she wasn't good enough? But then, as though sensing her hesitation, Victor looked up. His gaze met hers, and for a brief moment there was an unsettling stillness. It wasn't a look of judgment or criticism. It wasn't even a smile. It was more of a quiet acknowledgement, as if he understood the weight of what she was feeling. "Clara," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Come in, please have a seat." Clara nodded, her feet carrying her forward before she even realized she had taken the first step. She sat down across from him, her hands resting nervously in her lap. She tried to keep her breathing steady, but the nerves still gnawed at her. Victor didn't say anything at first. He simply studied her for a moment, as if evaluating her, as if he were deciding how to begin. The silence stretched on for a few seconds, and Clara felt her own uncertainty grow. What was he thinking? Finally, Victor placed the paper he had been holding down on the table in front of him. His eyes met hers again, and this time, there was something different in his gaze. A quiet intensity that made her want to shrink back, but also made her feel like she couldn't look away. "I've seen many performances," he said slowly. His voice measured, "and I've listened to many pianists. Most of them are technically proficient, but they're missing something. They play the notes, they hit all the right chords, but the music, it doesn't move you. It doesn't reach you." Clara felt her heart skip a beat. Was he about to say the same thing that she had feared? That her performance hadn't been good enough, that she hadn't moved the audience in the way she had hoped. But Victor continued, his voice soft but firm. "You, Clara," he said, "you don't have that problem. When you played, I felt it. I could hear it. The emotion was there, raw and unfiltered. That's something rare. And that's something worth talking about." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. This wasn't what she had expected at all. She had braced herself for the worst, but this was something completely different. Victor leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest as he studied her. "I won't pretend that everything about your performance was perfect," he continued, his tone thoughtful. "There were moments where I could sense your nerves, where I could feel the hesitation in your hands. But what I saw was someone who was willing to push through that, someone who was playing for more than just the applause or the approval of others. Clara could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had expected him to tear her apart, to point out every mistake, to tell her that she wasn't ready for the big stage. Instead, he was talking about something deeper, something she hadn't fully realized about her own performance. "You let the music breathe," he said. "You let it speak. And that's why I'm sitting here talking to you now." Clara felt a strange mix of emotions flood her chest: relief, confusion, disbelief. She had spent so much time doubting herself, so much time worrying about whether she was good enough, that hearing these words from someone like Victor Farrow felt surreal. "I don't know what to say," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't think I played well at all." Victor's expression softened and he leaned forward slightly. "That's the thing, Clara. Perfection doesn't always matter. What matters is whether you're true to yourself, whether you let your passion shine through. And you did that tonight." Clara swallowed hard, her throat tight. She had never thought about her music in this way before. She had always been focused on hitting the right notes, on getting everything perfect. But Victor was saying something completely different. He was talking about the soul of the music, the feeling that connected each note, the emotion behind the performance. "Look," Victor said, standing up and walking toward the window. "I know you've got a lot of potential. It's easy to get caught up in the pressure, to worry about the critics and the audience. But you need to remember why you started playing in the first place. It wasn't for the awards or the recognition. It was because you had something to say, and that's what matters." Clara watched him, still processing his words. Her mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything. But one thing was clear. Victor Farrow, the critic she had feared so much, had seen something in her that she hadn't fully seen in herself. He turned back to face her, his expression now more relaxed, almost as if he had let down some of the walls he had built around himself. "Tonight, you didn't just play the piano, you told a story. And that's why I'm telling you this. Keep playing like that. Keep pushing through the doubts, the nerves. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Because you do." Clara's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She had always doubted whether she truly had something to say through her music, whether she could ever be more than just another pianist. But now, for the first time, she felt a flicker of belief. Belief that maybe, just maybe, she had found her voice. "Thank you," Clara managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect—" Victor smiled, his expression softening. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real." Clara nodded slowly, feeling a sense of calm settle over her. It wasn't about being flawless. It wasn't about impressing the critics or winning the approval of others. It was about sharing her truth, about connecting with the audience in a way that went beyond technique. As she left the lobby and walked back to the dressing room, Clara felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt before. The pressure, the fear, it was still there, of course. But now she knew how to face it. She knew that what mattered most was her passion, her love for the music and the stories she had to tell. For the first time, Clara believed she could do it. She could be the pianist she had always dreamed of being. The days after the performance felt like a blur. Clara couldn't help but replay the conversation with Victor Farrow over and over in her mind. His words had resonated with her, but the lingering doubt still crept in. Could she really let go of the need for perfection? Could she continue to trust her own instincts, even when the world around her seemed to demand something different? She spent the next few weeks in a daze, trying to process everything. Her practice sessions took on a new energy, not focused on hitting every note perfectly, but on making the music feel real. She still practiced the same pieces, but now she approached them with a different mindset. She wanted to find the heart of the music, the soul behind the notes. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments where she stumbled, but each mistake felt like a lesson, a step toward something more genuine. The other musicians at the studio noticed the change in her. They saw her playing with more confidence, more depth. Some even complimented her, surprised at how much her playing had transformed in such a short time. But it wasn't the praise that made Clara feel better. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing she was on the right path. She was no longer focused on what others thought of her. She was focused on the music, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, as she was walking back to her apartment, Clara received an unexpected call. She looked at her phone, puzzled by the unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, she answered, "Hello?" Clara, a voice said on the other end. It was familiar, but it took her a moment to place it. It's Victor Farrow. Her heart skipped. Victor? Why was he calling her now? I hope I'm not interrupting, he continued, but I wanted to check in. How have you been? Clara's voice caught in her throat. I've been practicing, trying to push myself more. The feedback you gave me really helped. I feel like I'm learning to trust myself more. I'm glad to hear that, Victor replied, his tone warm. I've been keeping an eye on you, and I have to say I'm impressed. I think you're ready for the next step. Clara's heart raced. The next step? What do you mean? Victor paused before responding. There's an opportunity for you, Clara. A recital coming up hosted by a prominent music festival. They're looking for young talent to showcase, and I think you're exactly the kind of artist they're interested in. Clara's mind raced. A recital? At a festival? It all felt so unreal. Was she really ready for something like that? I don't know, she said, her voice hesitant. I'm still trying to figure things out. I'm not sure if I'm prepared for something that big. Victor's voice softened. You're ready. The world is waiting for you to show them what you're capable of. You've already proven that you have something special. Don't let fear hold you back. Clara took a deep breath. The nerves were still there, of course, but for the first time, she felt a sense of belief in herself. She wasn't perfect, and she didn't need to be. But she did have something real to offer, and that she realized was enough. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady. I'll take the opportunity. Victor's voice brightened. I knew you'd say that. I'll send over the details. Prepare yourself for something big, Clara. This could be the moment you've been waiting for. The conversation ended, but Clara didn't immediately hang up the phone. She stood there on the sidewalk, letting the weight of the decision settle in. This was her chance. Her chance to prove not just to the world, but to herself, that she could do this. Over the next few weeks, Clara threw herself into preparing for the recital. She practiced harder than ever, not with the rigid perfectionist mindset she had once had, but with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that this wasn't about playing flawlessly. It was about sharing her truth through the music, about letting her emotions shine through every note. It was about connecting with the audience in a way she hadn't allowed herself to before. The day of the recital arrived, and Clara found herself standing backstage, her hands shaking slightly as she waited for her turn. The venue was grand, with beautiful chandeliers overhead and a sea of faces in the audience. The other musicians had already performed, each showcasing their own talents, but Clara knew that this was her moment. It wasn't about competing with them. It was about telling her own story. When her name was called, Clara walked onto the stage, the bright lights almost blinding her. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The audience was quiet, waiting for her to begin. For a moment, she felt a rush of doubt. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she made a mistake? But then she remembered Victor's words. Trust yourself. She had to let go of the fear. She had to be real. Clara sat down at the piano and placed her fingers gently on the keys. The familiar feel of the ivory beneath her fingers calmed her a little. She took another deep breath and began to play. At first, her hands were a little stiff, but as the music flowed, she felt the tension start to fade. Each note was a step closer to freedom. She wasn't just playing the piano. She was telling a story, letting the music carry her emotions to the audience. The room seemed to disappear as she lost herself in the rhythm, in the melody. She felt the music inside her, and for the first time, she wasn't worried about the critics or the applause. She was simply expressing herself, and that was enough. The performance felt like a dream. Clara didn't rush. She let the music breathe, letting the moments of silence between the notes carry as much weight as the sound itself. She felt the connection with the audience, the shared experience of the music, and it was unlike anything she had ever felt before. When the final note rang out, Clara sat still for a moment, letting the echo fill the air. She felt a wave of calm wash over her. She had done it. She had played with her heart, and that was all that mattered. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. Clara blinked in surprise as the crowd cheered, clapping and shouting in appreciation. It wasn't the polite, hesitant applause she had feared. It was genuine. The audience had felt the same connection she had with the music. Clara stood up, her legs a little shaky, but she felt a sense of accomplishment that she had never experienced before. She bowed and left the stage, her heart still racing but full of a quiet satisfaction. Backstage, Clara found herself surrounded by musicians, all congratulating her on the performance. But it wasn't the praise that made her smile. It was the knowledge that she had done something important, something real. She had trusted herself, and it had paid off. Later that evening, as she sat in her apartment, Clara reflected on everything that had brought her to this point. She remembered the doubt, the fear, the pressure. She remembered the night of the recital, the nerves, and how she had almost let it all get in the way. But she had learned something along the way, that perfection wasn't the goal. It wasn't about being flawless. It was about being real, and in the end, that was all that mattered. As Clara sat there, surrounded by the silence of her apartment, she smiled to herself. She had made it. Not because she was perfect, but because she had finally found her own voice. And that was just the beginning.